That's what science does to you. Does this sound realistic?
Yes.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to tell me it isn't. Okay. Now, what you've done in this situation is you basically become a Hadith scholar. Hadith criticism is a very natural process, a very common sense process. Muslims like to create this myth around Hadith scholarship. Brother, you'll never understand it. Don't even bother. It's so hard. Don't even try and think about studying Hadith. Oh, sister, no, it's too difficult. It's such a, you can spend your whole life, you want to understand it. It's actually a very, very simple process. It focuses on two things. Where did you get this information? And is this information corroborated? Where did you get this information? And is this information corroborated? The first guy you met, the first guy you met, this sort of weirdo who says odd things, seems to be a little crazy, he tells you something that you think is shocking. And you don't really know if you should believe it. This guy, he's not a very trustworthy person. So what do? You go and you ask other people. This guy said that at the party, the boss said he's going to fire you. Now, you ask other people who are at the party, and they say, well, we didn't hear this. So you've looked, is this information corroborated? No. You know, I don't believe it. And then you get good news from somebody who you generally trust, who's generally reliable. So you're inclined to believe it, but still, you go and you verify it. And another person says, yeah, we heard this at the party too. The boss says he's going to promote you. It's a very simple process of first finding out where did you get the information, and is it corroborated. So, in Hadith criticism, we can think of there being 3 tiers of criticism. 3 tiers. Now, let's go back again to the city of Basra. This time it's in the year 820. Or no, 850, the common era, right? And somebody comes up to you and says, when the Prophet was born, peace be upon him, the great vaults of Khusro's palace in Ctesiphon, cracked. Great vault cracked, and chunks fell out of the ceiling and came down crashing on the floor and extinguished the eternal flame of Zoroastrianism, which was burning in the middle of the court. You say that's very interesting, but where did you get this information? Who told you this? Oh, I don't know. I just heard this. I don't know where. This is automatically useless information. Because anybody can make it up. There's no way to verify this information or not. Did you get this from the Zoroastrian court history? Did you get this from somebody who was there at the time? Or is this just legend? It's been circulating around the Muslim community. Okay? So, a report needs to have an isnad. It needs to have a chain of transmission. There's a very famous saying by a scholar named Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, who died in 181 Hijri, 797 Common Era, that al-isnad min ad-din. وَلَوْلَا الْإِسْنَادِ لَقَالَ مَنْ يَشَاء مَا يَشَاء وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُهُ مَنْ حَدَّثَكَ بَقِيَا. The isnad is part of our religion. And if it weren't for the isnad, anybody who wanted could say whatever they wanted. But when you ask them, who told you this? They freeze. They can't respond. So Islam is based, you don't just believe anything. You don't believe anything anybody tells you about God, about the Prophet, about how you're supposed to act, about how you're supposed to live, what you're supposed to believe. Only take things that go back to a revealed source. Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, right? And the first step is asking, where is your source? If they can't give you a source, then it's not, the information is of no use to you. Right? Second question, someone gives you an isnad. Well, I heard this from my grandfather, heard it from my great-grandfather, heard it from his father, heard it from the Prophet. Okay. But, did you meet your great-grandfather? No, sorry, did I say I heard it from my grandfather? I said grandfather, right? Did you meet your grandfather? Because I recall he died when you were very young. Yeah, I mean, I was 5 when he died, but I remember him telling me this. This is not very convincing. How do you must have heard this from somebody else. Maybe you heard it from your aunt, Zainab, who everybody knows gossips a lot. And Zainab said that she heard this from your grandfather. But we know Zainab can come up with all sorts of stuff. I don't think this is very reliable. And your great-grandfather, wasn't he kind of he drank a lot, actually? I seem to recall that people said he drank a lot. He was always drunk, wandering around, saying all sorts of stuff. So this is really not very convincing to me, because it might as well be as if there's no isnad. These people are all unreliable. And the final step is this report corroborated? And this is the most important step. If I ask you guys, let me ask you, how does Hadith criticism work? Most of you would say, well, you find out if the person is honest and pious, and if everyone in the isnad is honest and pious, the Hadith is authentic. That's not true. It's not true. The main source the main step in authenticating Hadith is searching for corroboration. You can have an isnad of people who are, one guy is, he doesn't really say a lot of stuff about religion, but he has this one hadith. He says, I don't know a lot about religion, but my dad told me that the Prophet said, don't put your feet on the table. Okay? But then you go and you find that actually a lot of other people are transmitting this hadith from this guy's dad. So-and-so's dad told us that too. We were all at this party once when we were kids, and he said, don't put your feet on the table. The Prophet told me that. And then you go and you find that other people in other families have also narrated this from the Prophet. This is the most important way of verifying something, because there's corroboration. And again, this is a very common sense way to figure out if something is true or not. In our own lives, every day, or not maybe every day, but maybe on a weekly basis, we hear something, we want to find out if it's true or not. We have ways of finding that out. What is the source? Is it reliable? And is anyone else saying this? Right? So these are the three tiers of Hadith criticism. And it's not 1, 2, 3 in the sense that one happened in the 50 years after the Prophet, and then the second tier started 100 years after the Prophet, the next tier started 200 years, the next tier started 200 years after the Prophet. This stuff all works at the same time. It's the three sort of stages of a process that person goes through in trying to find out, is a Hadith really something the Prophet said or not. Does anybody have any questions? Is this clear? You sure? Okay. Now, what about Western criticisms of the Hadith tradition? By Western criticisms, I mean scholars who are not Muslim and not from the Muslim tradition, right? This really began with a Hungarian scholar named Ignaz Goldziher, who died in 1921, and his use of form criticism. Orientalist criticism of the Muslim tradition really is a direct outgrowth of their criticism of the biblical tradition. In the 1500s, Western scholars like Desiderius Erasmus, died in 1936, Lorenzo Vallo, start looking back at the Bible and saying, you know what? How do we really know that this is really the story of Jesus? Let's go back and find the earliest manuscripts and forget about the Latin version of the Bible we have. Let's go back to the original Greek texts. And we find that, there's some verses in the Bible that aren't in these original texts. This is not reliable. Western scholars begin in the 1500s, and especially in the 1700s and the 1800s, criticizing the biblical tradition. And ironically, one of the tools they used to do this was studying Arabic, because they say, we want to know how the old Hebrews, the children of Israel, lived. Who's the closest people to the Israelites around nowadays? Living out in the desert, and they're very Semitic, and they sort of wander around on camels. Well, let's go study the Arabs. They went and studied Arabic, and they used this as a tool to help them understand the Bible. And then they said, well, let's also study Islamic tradition. So they used the same tools they used to study the biblical tradition to study the authenticity of the Hadith corpus. Now, one of these tools is called form criticism. Form criticism is the idea that if I go back to a book, I can look at different pieces of this book and see that different pieces of the book are actually originally used for different functions. Right? So, I look at one gospel, say the Gospel of Matthew, and I see that there's all these section